I think over the next 10 years is that we will start to see organizations predict what customers do next, and they're going to be able to provide a proactive experience, which is, in my view, will be the next competitive battleground.
Awesome, Colin. So I guess we'll jump straight into it. Colin, I really appreciate you sort of spending time to jump on our podcast and show today. Please share with me and the audience a bit about what you do and tell us a bit of background.
So my company, Beyond Philosophy, focuses on helping organizations improve their customer experience. But my background is I spent most of my life in corporate life. So I used to work for British Telecom back in the day. And then 20 years ago, my boss was to tell me something that was to change my life, which was, he said, Colin, I'd like you to improve our customers' experience, but do it at least cost. And ever since that day, I've not really thought of much else, to be honest with you, other than soccer, obviously. So I started Beyond Philosophy, my company, about 20 years ago, back in 2002. And we've worked with clients all around the globe, and we focus on helping improve their customer experience. Basically, I've got 300,000 followers on LinkedIn. Written 7 books on the subject. So pretty extensive backgrounds. 67,000 subscribers to the LinkedIn newsletter. So I guess I must be doing something right.
That's amazing. Is there like an example of a company you worked with and you went ahead and increased their sort of customer service experience? And could you explain what that looks like what improved, I guess?
I think the first thing to say is that when you're talking about, the interesting bit is when you're talking about a customer experience, effectively everyone has, any business, whether you're a small independent store or you're a multinational company, by definition, you have customers, and therefore that interaction between the two of you have a customer experience, okay? A good example would be Maersk Line. They're a global brand. So Maersk are the largest container shipping company in the world. And we help them improve there's a thing called a Net Promoter Score. I don't know if you're aware of that. It's basically a way of measuring your customer satisfaction. And they improved their Net Promoter Score by 40 points over a 30-month period. And that had a 10% rise in shipping volumes. So just by providing a better experience, you can increase your revenues. And the reason a lot of organizations are doing that nowadays is because, and Maersk is actually a prime example, the marketplaces are very commoditized, and consequently, how do you differentiate yourselves? Shipping cargo, in the case of Maersk, lots of people do it. So how do you differentiate yourself? Where you can differentiate yourself on the experience that you give to your customers.
So let's say the other day I was on a call with Qantas, our Australian airline, and I was talking to the customer service. And let's say you wanted to increase the customer service experience for their customers. Would you be going in and then looking at, how long it takes, what's the usual average wait time, how the customer service introduces herself, what the waiting message is, and then see if you can spice that up and make the waiting message more interesting, maybe a better music? Is that sort of what you would do? You would go in and sort of analyze the current process and see what can be more customer friendly?
Yes, but that's not the first thing that we would do. So let me explain the first thing that we would do.
Please.
So if I go back to my boss when I was at BT, who said, improve the experience and do it at least cost. The interesting bit is when you say improve something, it means that you are somewhere and you're trying to get to somewhere else. Okay. So the first question becomes, what's the experience that you're trying to deliver? So if I was going into Qantas, I would be saying to them, please tell me what the experience is that you're trying to deliver. So the experience that you had the other day, well, in fact, let me reverse this table for a moment. How would you describe it? Give me 3 words that would describe your experience with Qantas the other day.
It was quick. The communication and connection wasn't the best.
Okay.
And they sort of solved my problem and sort of gave me the answers I was looking for.
Okay. And how did it make you feel? So at the end of it, how did it make you feel?
I was satisfied. It was over and done with, and I got to the solution.
Okay.
It didn't really leave a lingering impact because it wasn't like it was like a average conversation. I didn't feel like I really connected, or it was a bit hard. There was like a communication barrier, so that in that sense we couldn't really connect. So I guess I just felt it was like, whew, that's how I felt.
Yeah. So you've said some really interesting things there, Andy. So one is you were satisfied, which basically means it wasn't bad, but it wasn't good. So does that mean you're necessarily going to go back? Well, maybe, So wasn't bad, wasn't good. You said speed, communication, if you think, so here's the interesting thing is, if I was talking to the CEO of Qantas, is that what he would tell me, or she would tell me, that they are trying to deliver? Is that the experience that will get them more revenue? Okay. And I doubt if it would be the case. Okay. The third thing that's really important is that when you start to look at an experience, okay, there are 4 aspects of an experience. So there is the rational part, which is, as you described, getting on the phone with them, etc., etc. There's the emotional part, which is how did you feel? And it sounded like you felt a bit of relief at the end of it, like, going, well, I'm glad that's over with. So there's an emotional part to it, but there's also a subconscious and psychological part. So the subconscious is so it's a bit like when you go into a bank and they put pens on chains, okay? And that basically says to you that the bank doesn't trust you, okay? So, the question then becomes, well, again, is that the message that you want to give to your customers? The speed at which you answer, the phone is answered. I'm sure you've experienced this, but, they say your call is really important to us, and then they keep you waiting on the phone for half an hour, which basically tells you that clearly your phone call isn't important to them, because if it was, they would answer it faster.
Yes.
And then there's this whole of this psychology part, which is effectively how do people make decisions, okay? When you look at those 4 parts of an experience, that's the important bit. So going back to your question, the first question I would be asking the CEO there would be, what's the experience you're trying to deliver? The second question I would be asking them would be, what emotions are you trying to evoke in your customers? And most organizations, let me hasten to add, don't know the answers to these questions. And this is exactly what we did with Maersk Line, all right? The third part of it is, which part of the experience drives most value for you? So in other words, Qantas wants you to become a loyal customer. They want you to book all your flights with them. So what aspect of an experience actually is the most important to you and that would make you return to them? Yeah. And so you have to define all of those things to effectively set the strategy to be able to design that experience, because that will then determine how you go about implementing that. Does that make sense?
It does. Now, how has Apple, the biggest company in America, created such a beautiful experience where you think about it, sort of a bit of joy sparks in your heart, and they've been somehow able to be worth more than Amazon, worth more than Microsoft, worth more than Google, and they just sell phones. How did they sort of craft that experience, and who's in their company, like who is in their company that's saying, hey, we should do this way, we should make our store look like this way, we should not put big locks on our phone because then that turns people off. We want to show a sense of openness. Like, do they have consultants like you working in their company? Like, how has Apple done what they have done when it comes to customer experience?
Yeah, good question, because I love Apple. So I'm a big fanboy of Apple. And I think a few ways, if people go onto YouTube and they type in Steve Jobs and customer experience, you'll get a video of Steve Jobs at a conference where he basically talks about the fact, and this is again where most organizations make a big mistake, is he talks about the fact that what you need to do is you need to start with what's the experience that we're trying to give our customers, and then work backwards from that to be able to determine what all of those things look like, and effectively how to deliver that. So one of the things that they have done very well in Apple is, and effectively through the Steve Jobs leadership, is they are very, and this goes back to my second book actually, so they are very customer centered. I would suggest to you, I think I've flown Qantas when I've been in Australia, but I would suggest to you most airlines, as we're talking airlines, are not customer centered. Maybe with the exception of some of the top level airlines like Singapore or places like that. But Apple are very customer centered. That's sort of part of the culture of the organization and inbuilt into the organization. But one of the other things that Apple do, and in fact, we do a podcast ourselves called the Intuitive Customer. And it's ironic actually, because about a year ago, one of the podcasts we did was, what are the 10 things that Apple do to improve their experience? You remember I said to you, rational, emotional, subconscious, psychological, okay? What they're very good at is looking at this psychological part, okay? So what do we mean by the psychological part? Well, one of the things that they're very good at is they're very human beings, and this psychological part, by the way, is effectively how we make decisions and how people communicate and what we do. So those inbred things to us, all right? One of the things that Apple do very well is they build a tribe. And so I don't know about you, but whenever I go into an Apple store, I feel I've come to a clubhouse virtually. So it's not like going into, over here in the States, Best Buy or something like that. It's a retail outlet. I actually feel like I'm going in there and there's a group of other geeks like me that love Apple. So, and they do things like they don't have tills at the front, cash registers at the front of the stores. Okay.
Yeah.
It's an integrated experience. Okay. So they do lots and lots of different things to engender that customer loyalty. One of the things that they're obviously big on is just on privacy. Okay. And they're doing again those things to focus on the customer. You shouldn't have asked me this question because I'm just going to rattle on for 4 hours now. But let me give you one more example. One of the things that Apple do is, again, from this psychological perspective, okay, is there's a thing called what's called a heuristic, okay? A heuristic is effectively a rule of thumb that we use as human beings to make decisions. Okay. And let me give you an example of this, because you also mentioned Amazon there. Because I live in Florida, the power goes out when there's a big thunderstorm. All right. And because of that, I decided that I was going to buy an uninterruptible power supply for the house. So I know nothing about uninterruptible power supplies. So I'm looking on Amazon and it's giving me all these details about the product, the amperages, the wattages. I know nothing to do with that, right? furthest thing from my mind is understanding that. What I do know, so the question becomes, how do I make a decision about what uninterruptible power supply am I going to use? Well, the thing that's important to me was how long would it last if the power goes out? Okay. Now, that's what's called the evaluability heuristic. It's how you make a decision about, when faced with lots of complicated things, what human beings do is we narrow it down to the one thing that's interesting. So, and I'm sure this is the same the world over, but if you think about when you go to vote for a politician, in an election, it's actually quite a complicated process to work out which politician to go with, okay? Because, this politician that you like may not agree, you may not agree with all their policies, but you would agree with some of them. So one of the ways that human beings, we make choices is, do I feel like with this person? Do I like this politician? Okay. And again, I guess what I'm trying to say here is that one of the things that Apple does well is, because of their customer-centered culture, they're very good at understanding the key things that customers want. And one of those things is just simplicity. So we want things to be extremely simple, okay? And therefore they build, again, the whole of that product experience around it being simple. So you can see I've got these wonderful earpods on at the moment. I've only just bought these. I couldn't believe how simple it was just to pick up the box, open it up, and it pings straight away. I've got an iPad, a phone, a couple of computers, and it's all connected, and I don't have to worry about it. Prior to this, I had some Bose headphones, and every time I had to do it, I had to worry about, was it connected to Bluetooth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again, it's just making things very simple, so I don't have to think about it. So those are a couple of things. The things, I guess, in summary, if you look to those four aspects, rational, emotional, subconscious, and psychological, they're doing all four of them. Most organizations, again, if we go back to Qantas or many of the airlines, they think about the rational parts. They're not really even thinking so much about that emotional part. And they're really not thinking about the subconscious or the psychological aspects of those things. Does that make sense?
That does. Talking about the emotional and psychological side of things, I put together this dinner with a few marketing heads, and we're talking about marketing and what marketing looks like when it's done right. And I think the example we're talking about was, like, let's say talking about a sort of airlines lounge, and how, the everyday person would talk about, hey, you should buy and pay to join this lounge because you get free food, you can sit and chill, free Wi-Fi, you can get a shower. That's sort of what most average marketers do. But the real marketers are able to sort of see past that, say, okay, people don't really care about food, people don't really care about Wi-Fi, but the reason why they'd want to sort of be in a lounge situation is they like the exclusivity of it. They like the status aspects, the fact that you're in one line where everyone else is in another. Now the tricky part is, how do we sort of advertise and talk about status, the ability to sort of be, have that feeling of you're above other people? Not really, but how do you sort of market that in a way where it's not really iffy? So and that opened my eyes. I was like, wow, you're sort of hitting the true psychological, subconscious wants of humans, and now you sort of, the taboo of talking about, hey, be better than people by going, that's taboo, so you want to go ahead and market in a way where it hits these people subconsciously, but it doesn't sort of turn off the rest of the audience. And that sort of just blew my mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to be honest with you, that applies to virtually all of the luxury brands. Okay. So let me give you an example. So, in fact, let me take a step back here because I think this is an important step back. So, Disney know when they ask their customers what they want to eat at a theme park, Disney know that people say they'd like to have an option of a salad. Disney also know that people don't eat salads when they go to theme parks. They eat hot dogs and hamburgers. So here's the issue. What people say and what people do can be very different. Okay? And the important message here is, and I find it ironic because as I mentioned, I've written a book on the subject of customer centricity. But I would argue that Steve Jobs, Apple again, yeah, nobody was turning around and saying, I want an iPhone that does this, that does that, that does that. Okay. You know, he brought those things together through the various needs that he was seeing. So the point I'm trying to make is this: don't necessarily listen to what your customers are saying. Watch what they do. Yeah, don't listen to what they're saying, or look at what they do. All right, and that's the important aspect of things. So, again, on our podcast, we've done a number of shows on this, how to look at luxury. So let me again give you an example. We did some work with one of the credit card companies, prestigious credit card companies. And one of the issues that their customers were saying was a problem was availability of the card, the places that would be able to take the card, right? However, what we discovered through some specialized research that we do was that wasn't the driver. The driver was exactly what you said, which was the prestige of having the card, being able to go, there's my card. You know, it's like the driving around in the BMW or the Maserati or whatever, you know. And again, if you think about it, that's the customer or the experience. So I can buy a very cheap car that will get me from A to B, because that's effectively the function of the car, getting someone from A to B. But you could buy a second-hand car that costs you, $500, and the engine falls out every 5 minutes, or you can buy yourself a Rolls Royce. What's the difference? Well, it's all of those prestigious things. So how you go about marketing it is first of all, you've got to understand what does drive value. Okay, so you've got to understand it's not that customers are saying I want a cheap car, I want availability of you to improve the availability of a card. What is driving value is the prestige. So how do you then market the prestige? Well, you can do that. Just look at the adverts that will be on TV for the luxury cars. They're very glamorous. You can see them driving up and parking in the spot that's next to this famous restaurant, and they get out and all the people are very glamorous. And obviously, and this goes back to the subconscious. Subconsciously, you're thinking, yes, I actually would like that. I don't know if you've been to Disney, but they have these fast tracks. The difference between just sort of queuing up and fast tracks. And again, people love going through the fast track because that's a bit of prestige. Just think of the loyalty cards that you use on the airlines. It's all built around that prestige and you getting something. Why? Because unfortunately, us human beings are animals, and we still remain to be hierarchical. And that's part of just human nature, basically. Now, let me also say, there are some people that aren't like that. Okay, so there will be another group of people over here that don't get turned on by that. Okay, so now we're into segmentation, because now you need to start to work out, well, which segments of the market would that have for the biggest effect for? Is that the segment that we're going to try to focus on? Because there's no point in trying to target those things at the people where that isn't important to them.
Very interesting. Talking about the feeling, one thing that I don't know if you're noticing this, but I'm feeling like a shift where companies like Apple are able to create a customer-centric emotional sort of benefit and value, whereas Amazon, they're sort of really focused on numbers. Like Jeff Bezos wants to give his customers the cheapest prices, the fastest shipping times, the most selections. Google wants to give their customers the best search results, the fastest search results. And it feels like there's a shift moving from creating the best experience through numbers, shifting towards a feeling. And then that's sort of why I feel like companies like Kylie Jenner's makeup brand is like worth $1 billion, because she's able to create a feeling through her makeup and through her content. It's like, hey, if you can use my makeup, you can look like me. And she's only 23 and she has $1 billion company, whereas to create $1 billion startup, that will take 30 years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because that's, again, if you look at it, if you think about the best brands in the world, there is an emotional attachment to those brands. I mean, again, if you just think about the concept of a brand, the brand exists in your brain, basically. Okay, it's a perception of what that organization is like. And that perception is picked up through lots of different ways, but not least of which is the conscious messaging and the subconscious messaging that is being given out. And that creates that perception in your mind. They did an interesting experiment where they put people through MRI scans, and they were scanning their brains to see where the activity, where the neurons were being fired up in the brain. And they basically said, and in fact it's ironic because I've got one of these here. They said, here are 2 colas. Take a drink of these colas. Which do you prefer? And it basically fired up in the part of the brain that was to do with taste. Okay. And then they said, I just happen to have this. Here's a Coke, here's a Pepsi. Now taste it. And the interesting bit was the parts of their brains that got activated were the parts of their brains where things like brands and concepts would be generated rather than the taste of it. So, and again, that's what I mean by this subconscious part. Okay. It's you can have an effect upon customers without them knowing that you're having an effect on them. Okay. Just through the branding work, etc. But I also have to say that whilst I would agree with you that Amazon, look at the numbers and it's to do with speed, etc., etc. One of the things that Jeff Bezos has talked about is that he wants Amazon's to be the most customer-centric organization in the world. Okay, first thing. And second thing is, whilst I think I've only ever spoken to somebody from Amazon once in my life, I trust them. If I get a product delivered, I can take it back. There's not questions asked. It's not, can you send this back and then we will have a look at it and then we may send you a replacement. It's, I'm sending this back, great, okay, we've credited your account. So they've already, by what they're doing, they've built up that level of trust in the with their customers. And you can do that. The point I'm trying to make here is you can do that digitally just as well as you can do it face to face.
Now, when you talked about that tracking device, the thing that came to my mind is I had this ring. It's an Aura ring, and it tracks my heart rate, variability, deep sleep, REM sleep. And I was like, wow, subconsciously they've been able to market themselves as this high-end sort of lifestyle product compared to the Garmin. Like, for some reason, this Aura ring has just marketed it in a way where it's like, if I have that, I'm going to be this upper echelon, this upper class. And I think I've subconsciously got sold into that. What type of people are in these companies? Like, are they hiring like psychologists? Are they hiring marketers that are not going by the book and using what they learned in university and they actually understand marketing? Like, how has Apple and these companies, who are they hiring?
Yeah, no, a good question. Our podcast the other day, we had, or a couple of weeks ago, we had two behavioral scientists, okay? And they were from fintech companies. And I said to them, how many fintech companies have behavioral scientists? And they said, all of them, okay? So if you look up, just Google Amazon science, okay? Amazon spend a great amount of time, as do Google, as do Facebook, as do Apple, on the understanding of behavioral science. And what behavioral science is effectively, you remember I said rational, emotional, subconscious, psychological. It's that emotional, subconscious, psychological bits together. So who are they hiring? They are hiring people who understand human behavior, okay? And then they are applying that to how to improve their experience, to the product designs, etc. I did a webinar a little while ago with Google, and we were talking about the word intent, okay, which is really quite an interesting word. So you think about Google and you think about the search bar, and you think about, I don't know about you, but if I'm searching for something, I put in there what I think I'm searching for, and invariably I get it wrong. Yeah. But what they've now done is they've started to put, they now realize that when somebody types in this word, they typically end up here. Okay. And which could actually be a completely different search term. So now they start offering that different search term up front to get you there quicker, okay? Because they've obviously got limited space. But they've only done that, going back to what I said before, which is not by, well, certainly listening to what their customers are telling them, but moreover, collecting the data on what customers are doing. So, i.e., I've searched for Apple, and actually what I meant was not Apple the company, but Apple the fruit. You get the idea, right? They're understanding how people are making choices, and they're collecting all that data. And the exciting part of that then is that they are then wrapping that into AI now. So those behavioral science part of things, you can start to do machine learning about what customers are going to do. And the exciting part will be, I think, over the next 10 years, is that we will start to see organizations predict what customers do next, and they're going to be able to provide a proactive experience, which is going to be in my view, will be the next competitive battleground, which is providing a proactive experience, i.e., doing something for the customer before the customer has even asked. So, going back, Andy, to Qantas, wouldn't it have been great if you didn't have to phone Qantas, but they all had already dealt with whatever problem was that you had before you even knew that you had the problem? Yeah, or that they'd proactively dealt with the problem and gone, don't worry, Andy, you don't need to contact us, we've already fixed it. And that they can do by understanding, because the reality is the interesting thing about the Qantas one, I lay your money, they could have predicted the fact that you're going to get on the phone to them. And the irony is that costs them money.
Yeah, it's tough because like if they have say 100 people on this one flight, they either spend a lot of money and just outreach to all of 100 and make sure everyone's happy, or they don't do any outreach and let the 5 people that have issues reach out to them. So rather than having 100 phone calls, now they only have to deal with 5, but then the 5 they get creates 5 unhappy customers, whereas if they went the other option, they have all 100 happy customers, and maybe that has a longer term ROI versus the other option, which might be more cost effective on the short term, but less cost effective in the long run where you don't have customers coming back. So it's this very difficult to calculate trade-off.
Yeah, but I think if you think about it, you think about the 5. So you're saying that there's 100 people on the flight and there's 5 people that end up complaining. And the problem then becomes, well, how do they identify the 5? Well, guess what? You can identify that 5 through some of the patterns of their previous behavior. So has this happened to that customer before? And what did they then do? Are they the type of segment of the customer that is likely to be contacting them? Was it something to do with, the affected prestige? And we've got this customer that's, I fly a hell of a lot. Okay, as I mentioned at the beginning, I fly back and forth to England. So I'm like platinum on Delta. Okay, those would be the customers that I would be wanting to keep. Yeah. But going back to this whole bit around the culture, the mindset of most organizations is, we've screwed up. We don't want to give customers, some form of credit or whatever. So let's ignore it and wait for the customer to contact us, because that's going to be the cheapest way of dealing with it. Yeah. And that's absolutely the wrong way of dealing with it. And that's extremely short-sighted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the mentality and the mindset of too many organizations today.
You're so right. Like, once we integrate AI, we can create really sophisticated algorithms that rank customers based on how many flights they've booked in, how many calls they've made. And all of a sudden you can predict, if someone's made a lot of calls, then they're most likely going to make another call on this new flight. So you reach out to them before they reach out to you. And all of a sudden you have a really cost-effective hierarchy on who to reach out first. And you just go down the list. And if you run out of manpower, you already made it through this sort of 80-20 rule type of thing.
Yeah. And that's where, and again, on our podcast, The Intuitive Customer, we did a show the other week where I was talking about what not I, but a number of people are starting to call customer science. Okay. So customer science is effectively the fusion of 3 areas that you've just referred to. So AI, behavioral science, understanding how people are doing things, and data. So again, just draw the conversation that we've just had together. So on one side of it, you've got AI, yeah. On the other side of it, so people are doing things automatically. On the other side of it, you've got data, which is again what we were saying, which was, has this customer done it before? Well, guess what? They've got the data for all those things. And then finally, the final aspect is the understanding about how people make decisions. Yeah. So those 3 things start to come together, and you can then use that to predict what customers are going to do. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. It's really interesting that you brought those 3 separate points, because that leads into my next question. Like, I was realizing that a lot of these companies, they're really strong in 1 or 2 of these 3 points. Because if you sort of look at like the Facebook, Google, and Amazon, they're constantly doing split tests, A/B split tests, change the color of the button, change the size of the button, send it out to 10,000 people and see which one has more watch time, more user time, who's on the apps for longer. So it's very, very numbers driven. Whereas Apple, they can't really do A/B tests. They have these highly artistic and emotionally relatable people that can be like, hey, this is what you want. AirPods is what everyone needs. At first, everyone was dumbfounded, like, what are these weird looking toothbrush looking things? And all of a sudden, everyone has AirPods. Hey, we're going to remove the aux cord. Everyone's angry. How can I listen to music with my cord wires? Now not. So they're somehow able to artistically, emotionally predict what people want without data. And that's sort of what you said, what I thought about.
Yeah, no, I think those organizations would do an incredible amount of testing before they come up with a product. Okay. So they will do, whilst it's easier for Amazon to turn around and go, well, here's a web page, we're going to put another web page that looks like this and another web page that looks like that, and we'll put different, people through one control group and blah 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 blah, etc. It's clearly more difficult to go, here I've got my phone and now we're going to just launch it. And I don't know, but I would have thought they've already got people. OS 16's the latest. I would have thought they're already working on OS 17, and they've already got some people that have got some advanced copies of it that they're thinking about how they use it, etc. But it's all to do with data. Okay, lots of data. It's all to do with then AI, which, as you rightly said, will then be able to take the drudgery out of being able to predict things. But the important aspect is looking at that data and building your AI systems, understanding behavioral science. Because if you drop off that behavioral science part and you're just looking at data and you're just looking at AI, you're missing that interpretation of, well, why are customers doing things like this? And what we discover is that, as I said, what people say and what people do can be different. And we like to think that we make logical decisions, but the reality is we don't. Yeah, we don't make people, humans, customers are not logical animals. Yeah, we make more emotional and psychological decisions than we think.
On that exact topic, bring it back to the Disney hot dog versus salad sort of scenario shared, where people said they wanted a salad, but that's not really what they're actually doing. So when Disney got that data, what was their conclusion from it? Would this be the conclusion? Hey, we should offer salads, but make it always out of stock. But we put that option out there so people can feel healthy when going into our stores and our amusement parks, and they don't feel like they're sort of really commercialized. There is this healthy option, but since we know that people won't order it and it's just the feeling of it being an available option, we should just have it there, but have it always out of stock, so that we don't have to actually deal with ordering salads. Would that be the solution?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So let's look at this from sort of one aspect first of all. Imagine now that you've listened to your customers, you've now filled the park full of salads, and you haven't got many hot dogs. What happens? First of all, you sell out of hot dogs really quickly. Okay. Second thing is people don't buy many salads, and so there's a revenue dip because you haven't got many hot dogs, and B, at the end of the day, you're throwing away lots of salads because you've overstocked. All right. Second thing is, I think that they wouldn't say that they've necessarily not got them, because there is a segment of the market who would want to have a salad, and you would want that as an option, and you would want to, you would have some there. Okay. Just the quantity in there, you would know that it's not, the sales are not going to be that large other than for this one segment of customers. And therefore you should be stocking up on the hot dogs. That could alter also the positioning of where things are in the store, what goes first, and so on and so forth. But I think that they should still have them, because that's showing that they are customer centric by going, look, our customers say they want them, we're going to put them on the menu, they will be available, but we actually know that nobody's really going to buy them. They're going to buy all this stuff over here. And again, if you think about that, there are lots of other examples of that. Let me give you another example. We did some work in Houston, Texas, and this was for a hospital system. And when we went into the hospital system, we discovered that what patients had been saying was they wanted to spend more time with their doctor. Okay, makes sense. Patient wants to spend more time with their doctor, fine. So they were just about to launch, increase the time with doctors, etc. When we went in there and we did this special research called an emotional signature, we discovered that it wasn't that patients wanted to spend more time with the doctors. What the patients wanted to feel was that the doctor had listened to them. The way that manifested itself was, I need to spend more time with them because therefore they will listen to me more. But effectively, the customer didn't think it through or articulate it in that way. Okay. Now think again of the consequences of increasing the time with them. They would have been, let's say they doubled the time. All right. They're doubling the time and still the doctors are not listening to them. So you've now doubled the time and you've made the experience worse. Okay. So it's getting down underneath and identifying the behavioral motivations that we have that are more subconscious and psychological rather than just depending upon what customers tell us is what you've got to do, basically.
Interesting. What was the whole process like? How did you come into that hospital in Texas, Houston, Texas, and find that, hey, this is what they thought was a problem, but this is actually truly what they meant? How did you, I can see how maybe you with a lot of experience was able to quickly come to that conclusion. So I guess the harder question is, how would you then train an employee to catch what you just observed? How would you teach them that?
Yeah, so typically what happens with us is, I'll give you another example, an insurance company who said, we've just spent $5 million on improving our billing system because that's what customers told us they wanted us to do, and it didn't improve our satisfaction one bit. And the classic thing is going, yeah, well, actually, again, you're listening to what customers are telling you. So what you've got to do is, that's typically how we get called in, okay, is when somebody wants to improve their experience, but they've either tried it themselves and it hasn't worked, or they want to short circuit it and focus on value. Going to your second part of your question, what you've got to do is you've got to educate the employees in this whole area. So you've got to, when you talk about a customer experience, people tend to go, well, I only buy on price, or I buy the thing that's most convenient, or the thing that's the fastest for me, or whatever else. They don't think through that rational, emotional, subconscious, psychological part. So you have to bring the organization's knowledge of that up to speed, and you have to train people on understanding all this type of stuff, okay? And as they've done in fintech, as I mentioned earlier, you have to bring in some experts. Now, you either bring in experts like us, or you're employing some behavioral scientists to be able to really look into the detail of how to go about this.
That's amazing. I don't know if we have enough time, but the last thing I'd love to sort of dig into is talk about your personal brand, how you've grown so big on LinkedIn, your newsletter. Talk a bit about sort of acquisition, because I know a lot of our audiences are consultants or entrepreneurs or business owners. So I guess tell them a bit about LinkedIn. Like, how did you get into social media? Like, that's really impressive, especially at your age.
It's an interesting story to a certain extent. A couple of things. Firstly, I've always just been interested in technology. So love Apple, love all technology, etc. So I've always had that passion. The interesting bit from a LinkedIn perspective, so I've been on LinkedIn for some time, but LinkedIn actually wrote to me saying they would like me to be an influencer because I was doing blogs on there and interacting with people and blah, 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 blah. This is like 10 years ago now. Wow. And they wrote to me saying that we'd like you to be an official influencer on LinkedIn, which is when they launched it all. And to be totally honest with you, I nearly didn't reply to the email because I thought it was a spoof. I thought that it was somebody somebody mucking about or whatever. Anyway, the long and short of it for me is you've got to have one of the reasons I think that I've done well in those areas is because I'm happy talking about all this stuff and giving away these things for free. Okay. So newsletter, the podcast, all the things we've been talking about here, giving it all away free. I think the other part for me is that I've invested a lot over the period of time into thinking new thoughts, okay, and then sharing with them. I find in my industry, the customer experience industry, that it's become a bit of an echo chamber with everybody talking about the same things, okay? And what I've tried to do is I don't try and talk about the same things. I try to learn new things. So did I understand behavioral science 15 years ago? No, I didn't. But I thought it was going to be a big area, and therefore I've got into it, and then starting to think, okay, well, that's really interesting. That evaluability heuristic that I told you about, my uninterruptible power supply, that's really interesting. How does that apply to customer experience? So I tend to read things, listen to podcasts that are from unrelated topics to customer experience. But as I'm doing so, I'm then thinking, that's interesting. How does that apply to what we're doing here? And how does that help us solve the problem? So picking out the learning point and then trying to say, does that apply in my industry? And then writing about it, podcasts, etc. And I guess it's proved to be successful because that's how I've ended up with the number of followers and that I have, basically.
That's amazing. Have you actively done anything to grow sort of your LinkedIn follower and newsletter, or has it just been consistent posting, sharing value, new ideas, and it just all organically came together?
Yeah, it's the latter. I wish I could tell you I had a magic wand or a secret. I think the secret is just hard work, mate, basically. It's as simple as that. It's just hard work and doing it consistently for a number of years. So I looked the other day. In fact, I asked the team this question the other day, which was, how many blogs have I now written? And this is on our website, not necessarily on LinkedIn. But I think I'm now up to 1,600 blogs that I've written since 2008. So that's a long time. There's a lot of information.
Now, this ties in perfectly with a sort of realization I recently had, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, Colin. So roughly around 2018 to 2019, I was creating a lot of content, teaching people how to build e-commerce stores, how to run Facebook ads, how to source products, anything related to e-commerce marketing. I created free YouTube content, so gave everything away. And I was gaining a lot of clients for consulting, for coaching, for course sales, and it was doing really, really well. And at that time, I felt like in order to get to the next level, I needed to figure out cold traffic. How do I acquire people who have no idea who Andy Mai is and not rely on social media, the ups and downs? Sometimes you get more views, sometimes you don't. You have no control over your lead generation, zero control. So I spent a year trying to figure out, build a sales process, hire salespeople, collect phone numbers to emails, blast the emails, call the phone numbers, hire appointment setters. And I tried to do everything from automated webinars to VSLs, and it was just nearly impossible. I sort of basically failed and give up. I could not turn someone who saw an ad from me and get them to pay me $3,000 for a course in a span of a week. Like, it was just impossible. I could not figure out, and I've known people who have been able to figure it out, but I couldn't because I don't know, maybe I wasn't that good. And over the last 6 months, I've been listening to a lot of people, and the constant thing that has been coming up is brand, content, not playing the math. Facebook and these advertising platforms, their algorithm is trying to squeeze your profit margin. Their goal is just to try to get your margin down to zero. So if you're constantly playing the math, your math is always going to break if you rely on these platforms. So my thought was, I thought in order to build a real business, I had to create a reliable, predictable lead generation method as a consultant or as a course instructor. But it's funny how I'm now going back to creating content where I have no idea if it's going to come back anytime soon, and it's very unpredictable. So I've been in this weird dilemma over the last, I guess, 2 to 3 years, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so to a certain extent, I actually had the same challenge. So maybe 15 years ago, we were getting lots and lots of business coming through the door, and we weren't advertising or anything. We were just getting people knocking our door, basically. And I thought to myself, if we're getting this amount of interest and we're not advertising, imagine what we could get if we started. Okay. So I employed a telemarketing team, 3 or 4 people. We built database lists. We did all the things that you just mentioned. Here's the thing that I learned, because after 2 years of trying it, I stopped. The thing I learned is there's a big difference between someone who's coming to you asking for your help and you going to someone and saying, hey, have you thought about this? The sales lead time for someone coming to you and saying, hey, I'm interested, could you help? Or I just read this and that was interesting, could you help? Is far less than going out and saying, hey, we've just made a phone call, I've made an appointment to come and see you. It's just an extended lead time. And the key difference is someone's coming to you has got a need and understands that you can help them. Mm-hmm. Somebody that you're trying to proactively target hasn't. Mm-hmm. And you've got to kiss a lot of frogs before you find the prince. Okay. And therefore I decided to stop that and focus on just doing the content marketing. And my second belief is Oscar Wilde. Yeah. He said, there's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about. Okay. And I've had that philosophy throughout my career, and particularly over the last 20 years. So I do things like this. I've got no effect if this is a good use of my time. I believe it is. Okay. Do I have any evidence to prove it? No, I don't. But I believe if you do enough of this type of thing, then eventually it comes back to you. I can't prove it mathematically. I just know I know from my history that, and I'm sure you're the same, you sometimes get somebody who said, oh, I saw you speak at a conference 5 years ago. Or I saw you, I was listening to your podcast and you said this and that struck me. So I think you just got to do these things, is my belief.
That's amazing. And I think I have a theory where everything you do sort of has this crazy compounding effect. Whereas let's say I reached out to a friend to go on a road trip with me. We went on a road trip. I noticed how much of an amazing conversation we had. So because of that, I suggested we should do a podcast. So we then created a podcast. Because we had a podcast after 50 episodes, I was like, okay, maybe I should start bringing on guests. Because I started bringing on guests, I was able to say meet A, B, and C. Because I've met A, B, and C, that led to something. So it's crazy how me reaching out to a friend to ask if he wanted to go on a road trip with me has let me meet you, which is crazy. That one little thing from 2 years ago.
Yes. No, there's that film, wasn't it? Sliding Doors. Moments in your life that has suddenly changed the trajectory of your life from something that's quite innocent that happens here. But yeah, no, I think you just keep the faith and keep putting stuff out there and it will work.
Thank you very much for your time today, Colin. I really, really appreciate it. Where can people find more about what you do, learn from you, and hear these amazing tips? Where are the best places for people to connect?
So you can by all means, connect with us on LinkedIn. So obviously Colin Shaw, and you can sign up for our newsletter, and then go on to our website, which is beyondphilosophy.com. That's beyondphilosophy.com. And the podcast is the Intuitive Customer podcast, where we talk all about this area of behavioral science. And I do that with a professor of consumer psychology, who, it sounds very grand, but we actually have, it's a bit like you going on your road trip. We have a really good laugh together. He used to be a stand-up comic, so we sort of have a good laugh together, but also talk about all this interesting stuff.
That's amazing. That's a great dynamic. Thank you so much for your time, Colin. I really appreciate it. I love how passionate about this topic you are. Like, we went really, really deep, and the fact that we could, I could ask these very minuscule questions and just keep digging just shows the vast amount of experience you have in this space. Because if you didn't, then I wouldn't have been able to dig that deep and get that curious. So I can definitely sense that from you. And I love the authenticity and sort of the just wealth of knowledge and experience. You've definitely been in the game for a long time, and I could just feel that through the screen.
Great. Good. Well, thank you for having me on the show. And you've asked some very good questions, so good stuff.
Thank you very much, Colin. So that's another episode of the podcast. Please let me know what you guys think. I've been reading all the reviews on Apple and Spotify, so please drop a review. I want to know your thoughts. I want to get some feedback. I'll be reading them out loud on the end of each episode. So thank you so much for your time. If you made it this far, I just want to say thank you, and I'll see you guys next week with another episode. Peace.